All right, well, thank you very much for joining the session. I think that this is probably the first time in history that if you're a person with a disability in the workplace and you've got some skills and talents, you are a hot property. And if you're black and female and you don't have a disability at this point, I would suggest working on it because that's an opportunity that you are missing. So the realities with disability at the moment is it's a bit of a hot topic in HR and in transformation and in diversity. And we've all recognized that this is a form of diversity we want to include in our business. But we're still whispering disability. So nobody really knows how to tackle it. So we start off by going, well, let's have a look at our company and see which are the key or which are suitable positions that we can earmark for people with disabilities. And I'll ask you the question, if I said to you, well, which positions in your company are suitable for black people? You would have a reaction of, excuse me, how do you possibly make that sweeping judgment? Same thing. When we talk about disability inclusion, we talk about, well, we can't accommodate people with disabilities because of the nature of our business. Well, they said that a couple of years ago about women as well. So, disability is just diversity, but we've got to feel comfortable to talk about it, and we've got to recognize its value to business if we're going to shift from a compliance to a transformative space. So just a little bit about where I come from in it. I started my business 22 years ago, and I'm an industrial psychologist. So we were all about assessing competence. We had nothing to do with disability, other than the fact I'm in a wheelchair. So I would go and sell my assessment wares to HR, and increasingly they'd say, we've noticed you're disabled, eh? We're trying to employ disabled people for our EE targets. Do you know of anybody? And I'd be like, well, sure, we hang in flocks. I'll just go back to the home and I can get you like 20. You know, what are you looking for? No problem. So it started to give me a bit of a twitch because I was saying, well, what type of person are you looking for? What potential? What competence? And they go, it doesn't matter. We can accommodate a wheelchair user. Give us one of those. Okay. So we started the recruitment division back in 2004 to say, well, we will find the right talent. They will have a disability and we will get them in the right role. We very soon realized that all the barriers to inclusion were still there. Nothing was changing. And so whilst everybody has good intentions and they really genuinely want to employ people with a disability, nobody really knows how to do that, and nobody really knows how to take a stand in terms of removing the barriers to make it feasible. So we started the consulting division in 2008. And I think that that's where our real work began, because in reality, I've put together a presentation which will take you through a couple of the reasons why we're not making much headway, and to give you a few secret tips of how to amend that. Okay. I think if you just look at my first thing, transformative cultures don't just include the diversity of disability. They recognize and embrace its value. Okay, and that messaging you'll see come out through the rest of my presentation. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is discovering why disability inclusion is good for business. Okay, we look at disability inclusion as a compliance exercise. We have conversations about how it's the right and fair thing to do. We talk about equity. We talk about, well, it's only fair. Nobody ever talks about, you know what, this is a competitive edge for my company. This is a business value transaction. This is smart for business. I was laughing watching the previous presentation when a good, cool slide came up. About 400 cell phones came up, and a photo got taken of the presentation, and then you probably texted it to a colleague and said, this is interesting, and you sent a text, and you all did it on your phones, right? Well, you have people with disabilities to thank for that technology that you've just used. When cell phone companies first developed cell phones, they had to come up with ways to communicate using a cell phone in a way that wasn't audible for people who are hearing impaired or deaf. So they invented text messaging as a service innovation, okay, to tap into that sector of the customer community. Nowadays, our children don't know how to speak with their mouths anymore because they are so fat. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, agreed. So you've got people to thank for that. What about computers? What about typing on your keyboard? You've got people with visual impairments to thank for that, because it was a technology that was designed to start having a typesetting way that you could feel the keys and you could put words on paper. So innovation from disability as a form of diversity has had tremendous impact on what we do today. We talk about technology and the fourth industrial revolution. You know that innovation where you're watching, you're engaging with your computer and it's watching your, marketers use it, it's watching where your eyes are interested. That was developed for people with quadriplegia, that had to use assistive devices to use a computer. So we need to stop thinking about disability as that we need to let them in because it's the right thing to do. And we need to start shifting our thinking to, why is this a good business case? Yes, it's about fairness. Yes, it's about equity. But it's also about good business innovation and good business value. And we don't have those conversations. The next point is to think about is, they estimate that there's about 1 billion people with a disability in the world today. Those are taxpayers, those are consumers, those are employees. Half of them haven't even told you they have a disability in the workplace because they're terrified of disclosing, but they're there. In fact, I read an interesting statistic the other day where they said the highest representation of disability in your management above levels is psychiatric. Because the more stress you get, the more prone you are to anxiety-related disabilities, okay? We just learn to cover it well, and we use words like, he's driven, he's eccentric, he's got a different approach. The moment you say he has a psychiatric disability, everyone would be like, oh gosh, no, don't upset him, he might come to work with an axe tomorrow. But you've been engaging with that guy for years. Okay, so we need to look at that. Disability is the largest minority group in the world. It's a lot of people. Now, here's a little curveballer. We look and we say, well, where is this talent with a disability out there? I read a statistic the other day when I was doing a bit of research that said that 70% of your working age adult group of people with a disability were not born with that disability. They acquired it. It's the one kind of diversity you can join in 3 seconds, right? So my thing is that we have to recognize that it's not an us and them. The disability is very much part of our lives every day. Quick question from the room. Put up your hand. How many of you went to school with somebody with a disability? Geez, you guys are quite a trendy crowd. Hey, was it all the same school? I'm impressed. You're really not working with me. Usually you get like 2 hands up in the room. How many of you work with somebody with a disability? Fantastic. How many of you know of somebody with a disability in your community or down the road or a friend's kid or all of us? Okay, disability until recently, we all know somebody with a disability. It's very common. But because it's not included in school, not included in work, we see it as a them and us. Okay, so that shift has to change. If we look at promoting dignity and equality for all, I had a very nice case study the other day. We'd gone in and we'd done an environmental accessibility audit on one of my clients' premises. And they'd put ramps in and they'd made it all accessible for a new employee with a mobility impairment that was joining the company. About 3 weeks later, the CEO's secretary, who he relies on more than anything in this world, had a car accident and crushed her foot, and she was going to be in a wheelchair for 6 months. So guess what? Before the accessibility audit, she wouldn't have been able to work for 6 months because she wouldn't have been able to get to that section of the building or anywhere around the building. From a health and safety point of view, they didn't know how to evacuate her. From an accessibility point of view, she couldn't use the bathroom. But because he'd done that one exercise, they were able to get her back to work after 1 month and have 5 months worth of productivity out of her that they wouldn't have had. You're all going to experience a temporary disability at some time in your lives, okay, at the very least. I've seen you pedestrians go to gym. I see what you do to yourselves, eh? The agony that you put yourselves through. And you play sports and you break yourself in sports all the time. I've never understood it. Okay, we're all going to have that temporary disability at some sort. So disability inclusion doesn't just benefit people with a disability. It actually benefits everybody. And we need to start recognizing that. Okay, I also want, we've spoken a lot about it, the fourth industrial revolution. We're looking at the profile of future talent and so on. They reckon that 1 in 4 of today's 20-year-olds will acquire a disability before they retire. Because we're living longer, we're working longer, we're exposed to more stress and lifestyle-related conditions. 1 in 4 of today's 20-year-olds will develop a disability before they retire. So guess what? Inclusion is starting to make a bit of business sense, eh? And in the Industrial Revolution with artificial intelligence, the opportunities to include people with a wide scope of disabilities becomes a lot more real. Okay? If you have a look at things like autism has been recognized as a very viable potential pool of people with the right characteristics to work in certain data-related positions from a systems, structures, monotony, and that sort of perspective, a focus. You don't need a lot of people skills when you're dealing with data and quantitative stuff. You need people who are able to concentrate and are passionate and are focused on that one thing and don't want anybody else to interrupt them. So we've got to start looking at the diversity disability brings and say, well, when we are doing these tech hubs, when we're designing these new innovative solutions in our products and service offerings, you consider disability as part of that. You're already in the forefront in terms of innovation and development. Okay, so how are we doing in South Africa and around the world? If you just have a look at the latest World Health Organization survey of 51 countries, this is obviously it's around the world, 52.8% employment rate were males with people with a disability, so amongst the population of people with disabilities. 52.8% of males were employed and 19.6% of women. That's around the world. Okay, so yes, it shows a bit of a double discrimination against women, for sure. But I want you to look at South Africa's performance compared to the world. And this is 25 years past the implementation of the Employment Equity Act, where disability was supposed to be getting a bit more of a fair play. Okay? In our management structures, 1.3% representation of employment of our workforce. Semi-skilled and unskilled, 0.9. We have actually gone backwards since 2015 in our representation of people with disabilities in the workforce, not forwards. All right, and I've got a couple of reasons for that. So let's have a look at the journey to inclusion. This first depiction, this picture here really just speaks volumes. If you have a look at exclusion, that's how we started with disability. If you had a disability, you couldn't come and play in our world at all. Sorry for you. You couldn't work, you couldn't go to school, you were completely excluded. Agreed. In fact, that's where the term handicap comes from. Because the only way you could survive was to beg or ask for charity with your cap in your hand. Cap in hand, handicaps, right? And then human rights people got involved and they said, hey, that's not so nice. We need to start giving people rights. So they took it into separation. Now, I was explaining to my 14-year-old daughter the other day the real impact, what it was like to experience apartheid. And she was absolutely drop-jawed, mortified by the idea that we had separate public transport systems for people who were black, separate entrances for people who were black, separate schools for people who were black, and we only allowed entrance into workplaces in entry-level jobs for people who are black. Agreed. She was quite mortified, and we all look back at that and we go, my goodness me, that was disgraceful. Let me ask you a question. We have schools, separate schools, special schools for people with disabilities. We have separate transport for people with disabilities. We have separate housing and homes and support structures for people with disabilities. We have disabled learnerships that are segregated for people with disabilities. How far do you think we've come? Is it any different? No. So we've got to start looking and learning from our mistakes and saying, well, what do we do differently? Why is it that you have a learnership that's for disabled people? That's not teaching inclusion. That's teaching segregation. Okay, shift our thinking. I know you're thinking, well, practically makes a lot more sense because they kind of get on with each other better and they understand each other and we can cater to their needs. Well, that's kind of the philosophy of how apartheid started as well, don't you think? Okay, so then we move to integration. Now, we're still sort of in between separation and integration. Now, here's what integration is. Here's our company. This is how we do business. These are our policies and our procedures. Okay, this is our infrastructure. We'll let you come in if you've got a disability, as long as you match what we do now. That is integration. You can play in our world, provided our world doesn't have to change. Inclusion is we are prepared to do this, to allow this, so that you can add value. Make sense? So let's just have a look at a couple of those type of steps. The first thing is we say, matric minimum, every employee, across the board. That's our company policy. Only 6% of learners with a disability, by learners I mean school kids with a disability, will get a matric. If you think our mainstream schooling system's got problems, you have to see our special needs schooling systems, all right? The opportunity to get a matric. What about if you're hearing impaired, if you're deaf? There are only about 47 schools in South Africa that cater for kids who are deaf or hearing impaired. And of those schools, only about 10 offer matric. Now, why do you need matric English and maths to be able to stack boxes in a warehouse? You don't. So you don't have to panic and say, well, we're going to drop our matric minimum for all employees. You're going to say, if we find a candidate with a disability that has got the skills to do the job, and they didn't have an opportunity to get the matric, we will flex on that policy for that person in that position as part of reasonable accommodation. Make sense? So don't make work for yourself and try and go and get the whole policy changed. Little and often, slow and steady. That's how it gets done. Okay. So integration is really, I like to equate it to, I will often go to a building and I'll phone reception for a meeting and I'll say, is your building wheelchair accessible? And they go, yes, it's absolutely accessible. So you go and they've got the token parking bay, which is lovely, and you get out your car and they've got a ramp into reception, which is awesome. And you get to reception and you say, I'm here to see such and such. And they go, that's fine. And they call, and then they go, oh, you can get to the parking, you can get to the loo on ground floor, you can get to reception, but you can't get anywhere further in our building. And these are new buildings. These are buildings that should be complying with the Building Regulations Act, with universal design principles. So that is my metaphor for where we are. You can come, but you can't play. Make sense? Inclusion is about thinking about inclusivity in every kind of diversity. So when we are designing our buses, it costs no more to have a flap-out ramp on a bus than it does a step. Included in part of your natural thinking. When you are designing a service solution for a customer, think about customers with a disability in your innovations or in your service solutions and use that as a competitive edge. They reckon that about 20% of your consumer population is directly impacted in their decision-making by disability. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of money. Okay? I was having a laugh this morning because I fly quite a lot. I'm from Durban, and I will choose 2 airlines specifically. Okay, and I'm naming and shaming. SA and British Airways, I will fly any day of the week because their assistant staff have been trained on disability etiquette. So they say, hello, Ms. Bradshaw, how can I help you? I'll take you to the plane. The airlines that haven't been staffed, good morning, can I help you? Can I take you to the aeroplane? And then they try and push my electric wheelchair. Because apparently if you've got one disability, you've got all of them. Okay? So you've got to cover your bases. And secondly, all wheelchairs must be pushed, and you're incapable of pushing yourself. So I accelerate at high speed and usually end up dragging them behind me. But that is service, that's customer experience. I will pay more to go on an airline where the customer experience for me is better. I had a delightful conversation with Mango the other day because their policy is if you have a disability, when you book, you can't travel alone. You have to travel with somebody. I said, excuse me? I'm not traveling with somebody. I'm up and down for business for the day. Yes, but you need assistance in the cabin. I said, no, I don't. I need someone to plonk me on the chair, get me off the chair on the other side, and if there's an emergency, drag me out the flaming vehicle like you would anybody else. Okay, so if you fight, then they'll let you on. But they will only allow you to sit on the window seat. Right, like this, I'm talking customer experience here, all right? I say I don't want to sit on the window seat because then I've got to be lifted across 3 chairs to get to the window. You've got to clear out the back row, you've got to clear out the front row, and it's a mission. I'd rather sit on the aisle seat. And then pedestrians can leap over me. It's like a free lap dance. It's a pleasure. So they go, no, ma'am, in the event of an emergency, we can't have you blocking the other pedestrians from escape. I go, trust me, in the event of an emergency, the pedestrians will step on my head to get out. Self-preservation is an amazing thing. I said, but you explain one thing to me. How the hell are you going to get me out from the window seat in an emergency? So you're valuing the pedestrian life over mine. Okay, now I'm just being cheeky, but this is the point. So we've got to stop thinking about disability from our frame of reference. When I say it makes sense to put you on the window seat so you don't block the pedestrian, it sounds perfectly logistical. That makes sense. Until I say to you, well, now I've got to be lifted over 2 seats. It's more risk of injury. There's more chance of me dying if there's an emergency. Do you understand? So you've got to stop thinking about disability from your frame of reference and start seeing it from another side of the coin, okay? So how do we do this in a business? There's a couple of key success factors in this. Firstly, the lead by example, and I know every conversation that you make about transformation says you need top management commitment. Agreed. It's a cliche, but let me give it specific relevance. If you want to go and flex on that matric minimum for that one candidate, for that particular job, whose authority do you need to get? If you want to put a budget in place for reasonable accommodation because you're employing somebody with a disability, whose commitment do you have to get? Okay. If you want to come up with a new way of doing business, a new way of tapping into this 1 billion people market, whose commitment do you need to get? I always say the fastest way to accelerate disability inclusion is if we can lob the leg off the president. That will be the most effective way of getting things done. Hey? I had a laugh the other day. I've got a guy he's an accountant, but he's blind, but he works with he's got a specialized software system that allows him to do his job. And he's very skilled. He's a CFO. So he said to me, well, I'm looking for a new job. So I said, I think government might be interested. Hey, having a blind accountant, perfect. Not all government, select government. I have to watch my manners. But I thought that was quite funny, and so did he. Right, so top management commitment. You're going to need resources. You're going to need to get commitment for flexing on policies. You're going to need commitment from top management to say, please can we not put all our focus on disability in the learnership space? Please can we put it further than that? Please can we actually make it about meaningful inclusion? Okay, we've spent a lot of money on learnership programs that are outsourced, off-site, which is very convenient because you get your tax rebates, you get your BE scorecard points, but get what? You've got no pressure to change your environment or your culture. So you don't. So when employees with a disability want to lead a learnership and come into your world, they still can't. All right, so we've got to think about this more strategically. And that's why I say, entrench inclusion principles throughout your organization. The marketing and the communications team of your company are absolutely imperative in getting disability inclusion going. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time you watched an advert on TV where the family is sitting around the breakfast table having cereal and living the high life? Eh? We've all seen those adverts. When is the last time you saw somebody with a disability sitting at that table as just one of the family? Hey? When's the last time you saw a model modeling clothing that had a disability, a visible disability? But I guarantee you've all seen that life insurance advert where it says, oh, if you've got a disability, you would need to be covered. Agreed. We've got to stop talking about disability as charity, social responsibility only, or a need of that bread. You better protect yourself against it because it's coming. We've got to start depicting disability as a very normal part of diversity. So in your branding, in your company's marketing, in your communications, make sure that disability is included in everything that you do. Not doing something specialized, doing something that people do every day. Okay. If we also look at things like your IT department, they are absolutely critical in disability inclusion. When we put people with a disability forward for positions, the first thing they'll say they use this software to facilitate sight and reading the computer and working with it. Oh, I don't think it's going to be compatible with our network. You need to have conversations with IT. They need to understand. When you are looking at or procuring a new LMS system, when you are procuring a new service delivery, you need to be able to look at the accessibility because that is going to be the tipping point as to whether you go with that service provider or that service provider. Okay, consider that in your decision making. If we look at disability awareness training, we tend to do it sporadically, hey? Everybody comes, it's nearly the end of the year, budget must be spent, and we organize a quick disability awareness training once a year. that is not going to result in change in thinking. Okay? Like my previous presenter said, it's really not going to create impact. Your disability inclusion messaging must be ongoing and consistent. One of the things we've designed now is an ongoing online training. So it pops up every month and it says, go make yourself a coffee, but remember, you've just lost use of your right arm. Now you know what you're going to notice on the way to the coffee machine? You're going to notice that the tension of the door is heavy to push. And it's difficult to try and carry a cup of coffee in your one good hand and maneuver your way through the door and swipe your access card, which is quick, and you've got to dash through the door, and then using the coffee machine and reaching this. So we'll give you real-life examples, and that's what people need. They need to experience the barriers to disability so that they can appreciate. When I say to you, it's not good enough to have a wheelchair-accessible toilet if it's got a plastic seat that breaks, or the height of the toilet is too low. They've got to understand the subtleties of inclusion, because that makes impact. And that means everybody is aware and they can make little and often adjustments. Okay, so your awareness messaging must be ongoing, and it must also be consistent. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who talk about disability, but you can talk about disability in several different ways. There's the pity talk. There's the, oh, shame, we've got to do more for these people talk. There's the, I'm so brave and inspiring because I've got a disability talk. That's not business language. So if you're geographically spread out and you have one service provider doing training there that talks about, look how inspiring I am as a person with a disability, and you have another service provider that's saying, you know what, I've got economic value and you need to recognize that, your messaging is not consistent in your organization. Okay? All righty. Just moving to speaking the value, because I've spoken about the brand. You need to start convincing people that disability inclusion makes good business sense. Okay, and I'm going to go to the next slide and just move into how you can sell that, because that gets interest from stakeholders and shareholders. Not, oh, it's just another HR thing. They want those people in as well because of our scorecard. It's a different conversation to have. And that's where 90% of you are under pressure, hey? It's scorecard points. You go, where are all these disabled people? We need to hire them and no one's there. Well, you know what? No one's going to be there until you change the way you resource, until you change the way you develop pipeline. Okay? And that just brings me to the next slide. And this talks about how we do it. When you are building a pipeline of talent, learnerships are not the only place. I had such a funny chuckle the other day because I went off to see a client, and they are a learnership service provider, and I went along to talk about their program. And I got there and I said to the receptionist, my name is Lesa and I'm here to see the CEO. I've got a 10 o'clock appointment. She's, okay, my darling, don't worry, I'll be with you now. And she goes off, she comes back, she says, follow me. So I follow her, thinking I'm going to the CEO's office. And she opens the doors and I go in this room where it's full of 50 other people with a disability. And I was like, why am I here? She's, because this is the disabled learner's room. She saw disability, she associated it with learner. And that is what we are doing in this space. Okay, it cannot only be about learnerships. It's got to be about creative solutions. Your bursaries, your graduate programs, you've got to include disability. Start sponsoring people's education earlier on, not just when they get to matric, but to get them to matric. One of the innovations we do with some of our clients is we have a staff loyalty program where if you have a kid with a disability as an employee, the company will review and sponsor that child's education to make sure that they get that facilitator that they need, or can go to that private school where they get that extra remedial support, so that that person becomes a potential employee of that company. Everybody wins. Your employee is stoked and loves you and loves your brand and is loyal. You take a lot of pressure off them so they can be more productive. You're supporting a future talent pipeline, and you're connecting them to your brand already. Okay. If we have a look at the way we resource, you cannot just go out there and say, we invite people with a disability to apply. You've got to look attractive to people with a disability. So if I go onto your website and I look at your career portal and it's not accessible, then you're just doing the compliance. You're not doing the inclusion. If you go to charities that represent people with a disability only to go and get your talent, you're not looking for talent, you're looking for the disability. You've got to start looking for the ability and the potential, not the disability. Okay? You have got to know which avenues to talk to. We've got a database of about 7,000 people with a disability that are job seekers. And do you know how I got most of them? Word of mouth. Okay? Getting in the right areas to talk about what you do, to find that talent, to reach out there and extract that talent. That is what you need to be doing. Getting in amongst it and getting your name out there that you truly are an inclusive culture, and you will recognize the value. And your job as an employer is to level the playing field so that that person with a disability has the same opportunities to perform as everyone else. Their job is to make sure that they perform and add value to your organization. Make sense? Okie dokes. I think I've touched on most of it. There is just one thing I want to say. When it comes to operational, you cannot allow the excuse of, well, we're in manufacturing, we can't have people with disabilities in the factory. Okay, that is not acceptable. It can be done. You've just got to know how. So make sure that when you're engaging with your operational managers and your team leaders and those that are genuinely worried about the situation because they are unaware, that you educate first, that you support, and that you make sure that you don't just go and dump that person with a disability with that line manager and say, cheers, I got my scorecard point, now figure it out yourselves. There has to be a way. It's a learning transition. And each individual with a disability is unique. How disabled you are is not about your medical impairment. It's about what your personality is like. It's about how much money you've got. It's about how much access to assistive devices you've got. It's about the culture that you live in. And that is a dynamic that needs to be, support your managers, support the person with a disability, engage your occupational health and safety people from a safety perspective to minimize risk, and make sure that inclusion is done holistically. All right, so I'm just going to move to the next slide because I think that we need to have a bit of a conversation about this as we wrap up. This quote has been, it was actually designed by a woman who was very much in terms of gender rights, okay? But it's such a true comment. Diversity has been invited to the party. Inclusion has been asked to dance. Right, now I want you to look at business. What is the business case that says this is going to add value? I will tell you, if your organization is genuinely committed to inclusion and your branding speaks it and your PR and communications included as a normal part of diversity, you get the same brand recognition as going green. Did you know that? Okay, so it's a measurable competitive advantage. We're right up there with bamboo. It's fantastic. All right, so what do you do here? You go out and you say, not we engage or we invite people with disabilities to come and join us. We go, this is our organization. We value diversity on a broad spectrum. And in that messaging, you include disability as part of it. All right, it must be a normal way of having conversation. The second thing, I mentioned earlier that 20% of the consumer population are impacted by disability in their consumer choices. I want to give you a real live example of that. Okay, I will go Christmas shopping, and there are stores everywhere, and I will specifically choose the store that doesn't have those 400 gift buckets around their aisles. Hey? You've seen it. They've got the gift buckets, but they're blocked, so you cannot reach a single thing on the shelf because you've got like half a meter of rubbish on the floor before you can reach. So I will go to the store that doesn't have that. Do you know how as a store you know that that's a problem? If you employ people with a disability, you start to understand that that bucket has become a barrier. Let's put the buckets over there because then people with disabilities can move, mobility impairments can move even easily around the shelf. You've also got to look at cases. I had a particular client where we placed somebody with epilepsy. And they were, at first, they were like, no, we're a retail store. We can't have anybody with epilepsy in our store because if they have a seizure, it'll freak the clients out and it's just not cool. So we said, absolute nonsense. This person can generally feel a seizure coming, so they've got time to get off the shop floor and go to a safe space. We'll sensitize and train the staff on how to deal with it if it happens. Everybody will relax about it. You know, we'll call it the person's party trick. We're all good. So they did it. The person didn't have a seizure. But I'll tell you who did. One of the customers that came into the store. They were shopping, they had a seizure, they dropped on the floor, everybody and all the other customers were panicking, and the staff moved in with calm, composed solutions. They managed the person beautifully. They got her, helped her up. They took her to the room. They phoned her husband. She came to. They handled that situation with such dignity and such respect that that person went on a whole branding campaign after that experience and said, I will advocate going to this store. It was the most exceptional experience for me as a customer. I'm terrified to go out to shops in case I have a seizure, and now I know I have a solution and a safe space. You can't buy PR like that, hey? It's good stuff. The third thing I want to tell you is that inclusion itself, I did a case study as part of my MBA thesis on disability inclusion because I wanted to look at monetary value. There was a chain of casinos in the States. They had 14 casinos, and they went on an inclusion drive where they wanted to make their casinos accessible for employees with a disability. After a year of doing this, so they had things like the lower table for their one dealer, who was a person of short stature. So the customers sat on the other side, right? They had tactile cards so that you could feel if you're visually impaired and you played cards. They had all these wonderful solutions. They realized after a year that they increased their income or their turnover by $1.4 million in 1 year, and they couldn't understand why until they realized that these are places where you have conferences, business conferences, hotels. It's all part. It's hospitality. So if I'm going to go to a conference with my 50 employees on a convention, my employee is going to make sure that the place we book is wheelchair accessible for me. That's a competitive edge over everybody else. I'm going to go there and go, when they say wheelchair accessible, it was like really wheelchair accessible. That place is awesome. I'm going to spread the brand. I'm going to put it on Facebook. I'm going to take other people with mobility impairments that I've met along my journey about this. They're going to tell their companies about that. Can you understand the ripple effect? It is a good business move. And I think for me, the recognition that we've done, how many of us have studied the value of diversity to business? Hey? They talk about the benefits of innovation. I was laughing the other day because, again, the cell phone companies, when they first came to South Africa, I was an internal salesperson at a computer company. And the first cell phones came out, and there were those big bricks. You know those big bricks with a pull-up, eh? And everyone was like, and the sales guys were targeting corporate, because that's where the money was. And then employment equity came, and people started dealing with, and people from all different backgrounds were starting to be employed in the sales team, and they were going, hang on, there's like 80% of our population that don't have the option of a telephone. If we can package this in a cheap and accessible way, we can make billions. So they shifted to the lower LSM market of cell phone users. And that is the largest income in the cell phone industry today. It's worth billions. But had you not been exposed to that diversity, you wouldn't have seen that opportunity. Am I right? Okay, so I'm going to wrap up now with just saying, disability inclusion, you have got to move your thinking from compliance to transformation. There are avenues to do this. When I say to you, you've got to have regular online or regular disability awareness training, you're thinking, how the hell am I going to get people in a room? You know how much that's going to cost? Because you're thinking about traditional training. Okay? Little and often, online training is something that is available and needs to be there all the time. As well as that, I want you to recognize that you've got to have that personalized support. So in our system that we've developed, every user that is exposed to the training, and this is whether it's mine or anybody else's system, you've got to look for this quality. It has an ability where every individual can ask a specific question of our disability inclusion team, and we will help them with a solution. So I had a candidate yesterday message me and say, Lesa, I'm on the Gautrain, and my wheel has literally fallen off. Okay, the wheel had fallen off her wheelchair in the Gautrain. She'd only started her job 2 days ago. She was going to be late for work, and she was in a panic. She said, please help me. I said, right, here's the number of a mobile repair service in the area. You need to call them and tell them. They'll come and fix it on the Gautrain for you. Phone your line manager or your supervisor and tell them, take a photo and send it to them and say, the wheels have fallen off. Okay, because it's real. Offer to work a little bit late that night to make up if you've missed anything. Showcase your value by being proactive and being able to allow that person the adjustment and repair. Make sure that you have a solution for everything. Because I was saying earlier, I'm the only person that I know of that travels. In my handbag, I've got electrical tape, I've got a puncture repair kit, and I've got the numbers of every type of repair and assistive device place you can imagine in Joburg. Because you need to be an excellent problem solver. And this brings me to my last and closing point. You must never underestimate the problem-solving skills of a person with a disability. You have got to see me when I'm on diet and my family put the chocolate on top of the fridge where I can't reach it. I will get the broom, I will get the bra tongs, I will get the masking tape. I will make a device that allows me to sweep everything off the top of the fridge. Okay, I am an excellent problem solver. I'm an innovator. When I got divorced a few years ago, I had to live I built my house to say, right, well, what do I need to replace a husband? It turned out I needed 3 hoists. It was the best investment I ever made. Didn't argue back, didn't give me any lip. You just replace the batteries, it doesn't talk back. I love my hoists. So what did I need? The problem was moving that distance from my wheelchair to my bed. What do you do now? You Google, you innovate, you go and find solutions. You go and find what you need. Okay, problem solving is what we do. And that is a massive key skill for future talent. Am I right? Okay, so tap into this resource. It's fine to look at disability and support it from a CSI perspective. It's fine to have inclusive learnerships. But please, stay away from your simulated learnerships where people are all done off-site. They don't get real job experience. It's not real-world exposure. I want to explain and just end off with this. The simulated learnership model, where the person is all people with disabilities in a room and they're giving you simulated work. We experience this in our recruitment division. We'll get those persons coming off a learnership where they're getting paid 6,000, 7,000 rand, because you're kind of like scarce resource if you're a black female with a disability now for a learnership, okay? And we put you in a real job. Guess what you haven't learned? You haven't learned about time management and punctuality. You haven't learned what it's like to be absolutely crapped on by your boss for doing something wrong. You haven't learned how to deal with a nosy and offensive colleague. You haven't learned how to deal with a customer that's being judgmental or complaining. You haven't had the exposure to the potential barriers of a real job that you need to solve. So part of giving persons with a disability a learning experience is giving them exposure to a real experience where they can learn also to become the expert in their own disability inclusion. Make sense? Okay, so just ending off, I think if we can try and focus, I know the realities of compliance and I definitely understand your journey. I'm a business person, I get it, all right? But make sure that the solutions you put in place are aligning and linking to transformative thinking, not compliance only, all right? The impact is massive. And I think if we just have a look at our employment stats, the fact that we have not increased, how much have we spent on training of people with disabilities? Absolute fortune. Why is it not reflecting in our employment statistics? Okay, I'm going to wrap up because I'm getting the question time. Thanks very much, but I'm very open to questions.
Thank you very much, Lesa. Thank you. Questions, or I can kick off something. So here's the thing. When I started off, I said disability is often like the elephant in the room, right?
Yes.
We don't want to talk about it at work. People just, it's a tick box exercise, right? How can we be more intentional when we go back to work today and start having those inclusive conversations to get onto that journey?
Yeah.
How can we be deliberate?
My first piece of advice to you is to stop whispering disability. Okay. We're so scared of saying, it was like 20 years ago when we said black, because we didn't know whether it was black or African or brown. You know, what was it? We're stuck with words, okay. A person with a disability is just diversity. Relax, take a breather, and just speak it. But get to know the language, because that will make you feel more comfortable. The awareness campaigning, I can't advocate for more. But I will tell you in my experience, so just a quick private story to make it home. After I got divorced, I did what every person post-divorce does in their 40s. I drank wine and I went on the dating site. Fantastic social experiment. Because on the dating site, your photo is from here up. People know nothing. If I meet somebody in a pub, they see the stereotype before the person. Agreed. If I meet somebody online, they see the personality before the stereotype. And in my 2 years of having an absolute jaw on that site, there was only one guy ever that when I said, well, I'm actually in a wheelchair, that actually ran for the hills, boy. He blocked me on WhatsApp, blocked me on Facebook, hung the phone up, panicked, ran. And what am I going to do with a guy like that? There's no problem there, right? Everybody else, by the time that actually, and I didn't lie, they said, like, do you like long walks on the beach? And I'd be like, no, I don't like walking at all. So you don't have to lie about it. But here's the thing. Confidence with disability allows for open communication. I am never lacking in confidence when I talk about it. So if I say, well, no, I don't do long walks on the beach because the wheelchair really struggles with the sand, and you'll hear the guy going, sorry? And you'll go, well, I'm in a wheelchair, so I don't really like the beach, but I can do restaurants. And they're thinking, oh my God, what did I say over the last 2 months that was offensive? And I'm thinking, well, I say to them, well, if you offended me, I wouldn't be talking to you, so relax. And then they're thinking, oh, panic. Now, I had a great first date with them, because can you imagine I could mess with their head, hey? Blind terror in their face. But 5 minutes after knowing me, nobody really has a problem with disability anymore, because they see the personality. So part of our job, when we talk about employee enrichment and empowerment, part of our job is also to give people with a disability the confidence to engage in an equal platform, to never apologize, to dispel the myths and the stigmas, and to show people with a mouth and a pointy finger, you can rule the world. And this what's needed. So go back there, don't whisper it, have the conversations, and actually just start to move forward with how are we going to take this in the transformative space, what are the cost-effective solutions of getting there, and know how to fight back against points of resistance. If you need ammunition, give me a call. I'm full of it. I can give you lots of advice.
Do you have any questions from the floor? Okay, there's a question here.
Hi, my name is Puleng. It's not a question per se, it's a comment. This is supposed to be an HR event, and this floor has got so many empty seats. This room has got so many empty seats. You know, it says a lot about us as HR practitioners that we're shying away from this session, which is very, very, very insightful. I'm sure whatever that you've said today, I'll be able to take home and implement wherever. The other floors, the other rooms are chopper block. There's no space there, no seats open. So let's go and nudge our colleagues. This is the session that we should all have been in to take home so much, so much. Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Lesa, I
Maybe
think
we should have offered free muffins.
and that's the point, right? That we want to shy away from this conversation, yet we can drive that. We can build our companies. We can build our organizations by being a bit more deliberate. And I think you mentioned it. You said that we can use whatever the positions we are in now to drive a competitive advantage by communicating to some of the things that you've mentioned. Yeah?
For sure.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi.
Got a question?
Oh,
Yeah? Oh, sorry, have you got one?
can I go ahead? Okay.
Yeah.
So I work for an organization that really speaks to the inclusivity of people with disabilities into the workplace.
Yeah.
However, we've gone on numerous drives to ensure that when people talk about transformation, that's exactly what they talk about.
Yeah.
Succession planning, not these 12-month learnership programs where we're not even thinking about the absorption of it. And if we are, we're actually really just thinking about ticking the boxes.
Yes.
And it becomes unsustainable for these particular individuals. And it's really disgruntling to see these young, enthusiastic individuals that have no other footing besides these learnerships. So all that happens to them is they just move from one learnership to another without the workplace skills experience as well.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think, how do we then really speak to transformation in every aspect of it? And we're not running those workshops because now we need yet another box to tick before we get our scorecard or before we go through that rigmarole. So how do we really sort of start creating that culture and that thinking pattern and that thinking process where we then say, you know, inclusivity really?
Yeah. I think you made such a valid point. I mean, if I just look at the candidates or the talent with disabilities that I come in, that when we phone them and say, listen, we almost sound apologetic, we've got a learnership. No, I've been on 6, I'm not interested anymore, blah. People go from one to another. And learnerships are, in theory, a fabulous tool to get people upskilled. But it's the shortcut, quick fix approach that has given them, it's become a swear word in the disability community. Okay, so what do? You've already got talent development structures in place. Make them inclusive. Your graduate programs, your internships, get somebody in entry level, but then fast track in terms of investing in their development, like we did with women, like we did with black. All your job is to say we can do it, and we want to do it, and we've committed resources to it. Now, you and I need to have a conversation to make sure how that we can pave the way so that you've got an equal opportunity to perform like everybody else. And then we expect full performance from you. Does it make sense? So use the platforms you've already got, but include the disability element in your way of thinking. I think that's because you don't want to you shouldn't have a disability strategy that's separate to a transformation strategy. It's the same language. You know what I mean? You shouldn't only be speaking about disability from well, it's a human rights thing to do. In your communications, it's around we want to invest in talent. If you've got and I say to people, if you've got a disability right now, you're hot property. But equip yourself with the tools to know how to help your employer help you and have that conversation. So I think learnerships done right, valuable. Simulated, offsite, excluded, not valuable. And translate, have a succession or a path that when the learner comes through that process, that they can then go into the next level. And then there's a career path put in place for them, provided they're the right person to add value to your business. Okay, there's another question here, I think.
There's another question here.
Yeah. My name is Helen Damase, and I'm totally blind. What I would like to know is who holds companies accountable for accommodating persons with disabilities? Because you'll find that we get employed, but we're not given the right positions.
Yeah.
Low positions are created that are out of the structure and the organogram of the department.
Yeah.
And then there's no career pathing. With assistive devices, it's even worse. With visual impairment, you need to get a speech program which is called JAWS. And when you ask maybe your line to say, we need this, it takes forever. And you're forever being told that you're wasting the company's money. Hey, you'll get it next year when you have the budget. And you're being rendered as somebody that is incompetent or does not know what to do.
Yeah.
But when you go to labor, maybe to say, please make sure that this company make sure that this company buys things for us, or that. No, they don't do that. They don't even come to the company to say, let us help you to fix the mistakes. And the worst part of it, you'll find that if they have programs that they do with the department, you find that the company will have a best employer award that they get. But when you look at that, we're not getting the best accommodation, and we're not being helped the way we're supposed to. What do we do in that case? When you try to talk to top management, they don't want to hear anything, and they tell you about reporting, and HR is not doing anything at all, because they would go to line and say, you said you wanted a person with a disability, here's that person, and leave me alone. And what do you do in that case?
All right, so just to start off with, there are penalties. I mean, the Labour Department will come and whack you with a nasty big fine if you don't get your compliance targets agreed, which is why everybody's panicking for it, because you've got to get that target. Unfortunately, what the Labour legislation doesn't do is it gives you guidelines on how to get there, but there's no legal benchmarks. Okay, so we say you must be inclusive and you must employ people with a disability, okay? And then they leave it up to you as to how to do it. So there is no benchmark that from a legal perspective, or very few examples, that you can actually, as a person with a disability, go and actually claim unfair labor practice, because the benchmarks to use are so few and far between. So the way it is now is you get penalized for non-compliance, but nobody guides you with how to do this sustainably. All right, and that's why the conversations with the right people in terms to how to get that done is so imperative. Applying the transformative approach is imperative. And all I have to say is right now, you need to educate the CCMA. As a person with a disability, if you are put in a position, the company is by law obliged to reasonably accommodate, but the law doesn't tell you what's reasonable, okay? So if there is direct unfair labor practice there, you need to start setting the benchmarks at the CCMA by taking your complaints there and fighting it through to the end. Only then will there be benchmarks against which companies can set their best practice. Does that make sense?